Every day, my 12-year-old brother-in-law would tell me, "Sister-in-law, I'm feeling so hot," even though it was the middle of winter. One day, something happened that left me completely shaken. What I saw on his phone, you wouldn't believe it. My story today is devoid of modesty, not because I'm an immodest or immoral woman, but because I want to highlight something that's happening in today's society. Someone has to address these issues. Sharing this story makes me feel very ashamed, but I believe it's a lesson every mother, sister, and daughter needs to hear, especially those responsible for young children or teenagers. Too often we hide behind the veil of modesty and leave important issues unaddressed, only to have them come back as problems later. If I don't speak up today, if I don't push past my own discomfort to bring attention to this issue, our society might be heading toward a serious moral decline. So, my dear listeners, please listen to this story to the end. It contains a lesson that could make a real difference. My name is Shabana. When I got married, I moved into a household that included my husband and his 12-year-old younger brother. Since my mother and father-in-law were no longer alive, the boy's care and responsibility fell on my shoulders from the very day of my wedding. I took him to my heart, thinking I would care for him like a big sister, even like a mother. And I did just that. I never kept my brother-in-law, Shoaib, at a distance. I looked after him and paid close attention to all his needs. Since I didn't have a brother of my own, I loved him more than any biological sibling could. In some ways, he filled a void in my life. I would buy him clothes, take care of his every little need, and wander the markets to fulfill his wishes. Whatever he asked for, I tried my best to make it happen. He loved the food I cooked, so I would spend hours in the kitchen preparing his favorite meals. But gradually, Shoaib began to drift away from me. If I sat in his room for a while, he would grow uneasy, looking around as though my presence made him uncomfortable. He used to play board games with me at night, but he had given that up as well. He started going to his room early and spending less time with me. I thought perhaps he was growing up and wanted more privacy, or that he just didn't like me being so close to him anymore. I started keeping my distance, unaware of what path my neglect might lead him down. About a year after my marriage, something happened that I'll never forget. Late one night, as darkness covered everything, I saw my brother-in-law climbing the stairs to the roof. I had just stepped out of my room for something when I noticed him going up. When I glanced at the clock, it was past 1 a.m. I immediately called out, "Shoaib, where are you going? What are you doing on the roof at this hour?" I took a step toward him and he looked startled. His face showed clear signs of nervousness and he stammered, "Sister-in-law, I'm feeling really hot. I don't know why, but it feels suffocating in my room. I thought I'd go up on the roof to get some fresh air." His explanation made me stop in my tracks. I asked him, "Are you all right? It's December. Chilly winds are everywhere. You can't even lie down without a blanket. And you're feeling hot? Are you feeling okay?" As I said this, I walked closer and placed my hand on his forehead. Sure enough, he was sweating, which surprised me because I was wearing a light sweater over my clothes since the cold had intensified over the past 2 days. Yet there he was, drenched in sweat. Despite my repeated questions, he simply replied, "There's nothing to worry about. I'm fine. I'll come back down in a little while." Saying this, he quickly climbed the stairs. I was heading toward the kitchen, so after Shoaib went up, I went into the kitchen, grabbed a water bottle and glass, and returned to my room. My husband, Zamir, asked, "Who were you talking to?" He had apparently woken up from sleep, perhaps due to my voice or because he noticed I wasn't in the room. I told him it was Shoaib. He was heading to the rooftop. He said he was feeling hot, and that's why I was surprised. How could he feel hot in such cold weather? I was just asking if he was unwell. After hearing me out, Zamir shook his head and said, "He's growing up. It's just that age when boys feel hot-headed. Why are you making a fuss over it? If you had a brother at home, you'd understand." Then he added, "Don't hover over Shoaib so much. He's at an age where too many questions will only push him further away. Boys are just like that at this stage. Besides, we belong to a very honorable family. Our boys are more virtuous than the girls. Not like your family that would disgrace themselves in front of everyone." As usual, my husband made his disparaging comment and turned away to lie down. Hearing this, a pang went through my heart. My husband never missed a chance to remind me that there were no men in my family. Among my relatives, I only had one uncle, whose son had eloped with my third sister. Zamir constantly used that against me, even though it wasn't my fault. The two of them were in love, and since my aunt hadn't agreed to their marriage, her son ran away with my sister Saba. But he married her respectfully, and my aunt eventually accepted them both. Still, that stain on our family name refused to fade, and Zamir never let me forget it. This time was no different. With a heavy sigh, I sat down on the bed. We were four sisters, raised by a widowed mother. I was the eldest, and I had married Zamir. My marriage to him had been arranged due to his mother's last wish. She had asked for our wedding on her deathbed, even though Zamir was not at all happy about it. But since my mother and Zamir's mother were childhood friends, their insistence solidified the union. Zamir, however, had always wanted an affluent and influential in-law family, one that could support him financially through thick and thin, and with brothers-in-law who could stand behind him. Instead, he ended up with a widowed mother-in-law and three young sisters-in-law. He often lamented that if I had brothers, they could have helped him. I couldn't understand why he cared so much. He was a grown man with a job. What difference did it make whether I had brothers? Yet he would frequently bring it up, just as he often reminded me about Saba's elopement, saying that my family lacked any claim to respectability. Not long after the wedding, I began to understand why this was the case. It turned out I had a married sister-in-law named Noreen. Her husband didn't work much, and whenever she needed money, he would force her to come to our house. She would arrive crying and pleading in front of Zamir, and he would give her some money from his salary before she left. As a result, Zamir always felt that if he had brothers-in-law, he could go to his own family in difficult times and bring back money. This thought alone was enough to make me feel ashamed. I couldn't understand why he seemed to want me in the same state as his sister. It was deeply humiliating to think that even with a husband, my sister-in-law had to stretch out her hands in front of my husband. I could clearly feel the shame in her eyes, being a woman myself. But Zamir didn't seem to notice the humiliation in his sister's lowered gaze. He just wanted the same kind of help from his brothers-in-law that he was giving to his brother-in-law. But God had willed otherwise. I had no brothers or any close male relatives who could stand behind me as a source of strength. Ever since my uncle's son married Saba, my mother had severed all ties with her in anger. This too was because of Zamir. My mother felt deeply ashamed in front of Zamir and closed the doors of our home to Saba. Yet even this didn't satisfy Zamir. Once again, he used it to insult me, pointing out that there were no boys in my family and that I couldn't possibly understand boys. But I wasn't so naive as to not realize that it was unusual for a 12-year-old boy to feel so hot in the middle of winter that he'd go straight to the rooftop. Strange thoughts swirled in my mind. My mother often said that at night jinn and ghosts roam the rooftop, so one should avoid going up there. My brother-in-law Shoaib was very handsome and endearing, with slightly long hair that reached his shoulders. I couldn't help but wonder if he might be under some kind of supernatural influence. But I knew if I shared such a thought with my husband, he would be furious because he had no tolerance for such ideas. So I stayed quiet, lay down, and eventually fell asleep thinking about Shoaib. The next morning, when Shoaib sat down for breakfast, I looked closely at his face. His eyes were indeed red. My first thought was that he might be possessed by a jinn. But I quickly dismissed the thought and, as I placed breakfast in front of him, asked how he was feeling. Hearing my question, he seemed startled and hesitated before replying, "I'm fine now. I just felt a bit hot last night." I gently told him not to go to the rooftop at night anymore, adding that bad things can be lurking there, and it's better to stay safe. Hearing this, he looked at me in surprise, then smiled faintly and said, "You don't need to worry about me. Just take care of my brother." There was a hint of bitterness in his tone that I couldn't miss. That's when I realized he wasn't as much of a child as we thought. He understood the unspoken tension between Zamir and me, and he indirectly acknowledged it in his words. Feeling deeply ashamed, I quickly got up from the table, my heart filled with even more resentment towards Zamir. They always humiliated me in front of everyone. No matter the situation, they would say such things that I couldn't raise my head in front of others. Even when my own mother and sisters visited, they didn't hesitate to disgrace me. And now today, Shoaib had also made it clear to me that he was aware of the tensions between us. I didn't question him again, and he left for school. Coincidentally, my sister-in-law came by again that evening. When I saw Noreen, I noticed a bruise on her face, and I immediately understood that her husband had hit her again. She sat down next to me, crying. Our mother had passed away, and the shadow of our father had been gone for years. I was her only older sister-in-law, and she would often confide in me. She said, "Bobby, they were asking for money again." I refused and said I wouldn't go to Zamir Bai again, so he beat me badly and forced me to come here. He even said that if I didn't bring money, he'd divorce me. I hate having to ask my brother for money again and again. You just got married. Soon you'll have children and your own expenses. How long can Zamir Bai keep giving my husband money because of me? But Tabriz doesn't understand this. Hearing this, I gave a faint smile and said, "You know, Noreen, all men are the same. They take full advantage of a woman's weakness. Your Zamir Bai will continue helping you throughout your life. Do you know why? Because deep down, he wants someone to help him in the same way. He doesn't mind what Tabriz is doing because his own thinking is just like Tabriz's. He is deeply regretful that he doesn't have a brother-in-law who would give me money, just like he gives you money." Tears welled up in my eyes. For the first time, I opened my heart to Noreen. Until then, I had always tried to cover up my husband's flaws. That's why, hearing my words, she was genuinely surprised. She said, "Bobby, what's wrong with Bai? He has a decent job. Why would he need someone else's help? And why would you ask your family for money?" Only I know how humiliating it feels to come here and ask for help. But if I don't, my husband will divorce me and kick me out for good. I'll talk to Bai myself. Upon hearing this, I folded my hands and pleaded, "Please don't say anything to Zamir. If you do, our relationship will become even more strained." My words made her grab my hand and reassure me. Then she asked about Shoaib, so I gently told her what had happened last night. I couldn't keep that matter to myself anymore. I truly felt something was wrong with Shoaib's health. That's why I confided in Noreen. As his sister, she had the right to question him. After listening, she was taken aback and said, "I'll talk to Shoaib and find out what's going on with him. Anyway, he hasn't been interested in studying lately. His last result was bad too, wasn't it?" She reminded me of what I had almost forgotten. I replied, "Yes, his result wasn't good. But Shoaib said he was unwell during exams, that's why." Noreen laughed and said, "Shoaib is very good at lying. Don't ever believe what he says. He doesn't have his mother's shadow over him, but a Bobby is just like a mother. That's why you need to be strict with him. Make sure he studies and check in on his room at odd hours to see if he's sleeping or still on his phone with friends." I told Zamir Bai not to give him a phone at such a young age, but he never listens to anyone. Shoaib is already very spoiled by him, but you need to be careful so that he doesn't fall into bad company. Noreen had made a valid point, one that caught me off guard. I hadn't even considered it. I was too focused on thoughts of ghosts and spirits because my mother often talked about such things. I began to wonder more about Shoaib's friends, though I didn't know much about them. But I remembered that when he was heading to the rooftop at night, he had his phone in his hand. That thought startled me. What was he doing on the rooftop with his phone? I promised Noreen I would keep an eye on Shoaib, as I didn't want her to be even more worried than she already was. She was already distressed by her own household issues, and if I didn't assure her about Shoaib, she would only grow more anxious. Noreen was the kind of sister who deeply cared for her brothers and was genuinely concerned about them. She was worried about both Shoaib and Zamir. Zamir never refused to give her money. Yet she constantly worried about the long-term impact. What would happen if Zamir kept giving her money like this? That unselfish attitude of hers was something I admired. She wasn't selfish. She was someone who valued relationships and fulfilled them with a pure heart. When Zamir returned from work, he immediately handed Noreen 5,000 rupees, and she left for her in-laws' house. After that, Zamir went to the bedroom to rest. I thought about quietly peeking into Shoaib's room to see what he was up to. I tiptoed into his room and saw him lying face down on the bed, facing away from me. I intended to approach quietly so he wouldn't notice, but somehow he sensed my presence without me making a sound. He suddenly sat up, startled, and the phone fell out of his hand onto the bed. His reaction shocked me. Why was he so jumpy? He scolded me, saying, "Bobby, what kind of behavior is this? You snuck in here like a cat and scared me." He sat upright and I sat beside him, gently asking, "What were you doing?" You have school in the morning. Why aren't you asleep yet? He smiled and suddenly hugged me, saying, I was just about to sleep. I stroked his hair, helped him lie back down on the bed, and firmly said, Don't touch the phone again. Get some rest. He immediately shut his eyes and lay down, and I left the room. But I couldn't shake the thoughts running through my head. What had he been doing on his phone that made him so startled he dropped it? I decided to find out the truth, but for a day or two, nothing unusual happened that made me suspicious. On the third day, I washed some clothes and hung them to dry, but some of them disappeared from the line. I searched everywhere but couldn't find them. No one else was home all day except Shoaib and me, and the type of clothes that were missing. I felt too ashamed to question Shoaib about it. Then it occurred to me that perhaps I hadn't pinned the clothes securely, and they might have blown over into the neighbor's yard because the wall separating our courtyard from theirs was quite low. But considering the nature of the clothes, I couldn't bring myself to ask the neighbors either. I became increasingly anxious. A couple of days passed in this confusion, and I didn't mention it to Zamir either because I feared he'd blame me instead. On the fourth night, as I stepped out of my room, I noticed a faint light coming from Shoaib's room. In the dark, the faint glow clearly came from a mobile phone. That alone startled me. What was he doing on his phone at 3 a.m.? His door was slightly ajar, so I tiptoed inside without any difficulty. I was even more careful than before, but as soon as I stepped in, what I saw left me completely shocked. Shoaib was lying on his stomach, facing away from me. That was his usual sleeping position, so he didn't sense my presence. But from where I stood, I could clearly see the phone screen. The kind of videos playing on it at that hour made me feel utterly ashamed. Even as a married woman, I had never seen such indecent content. The partially clad figures moving on the screen disgusted me. I wanted to grab him by the collar and slap him a few times. As I moved closer, I noticed something that stunned me even more. He was holding the very clothes that had gone missing from the clothesline. He was pressing them against his lips, sometimes against his face, and there was a strange intensity in his behavior. I immediately turned on the room light and he jumped up in shock. I snatched the clothes and phone from him, anger boiling inside me. I demanded, "What is this? What's going on?" He broke down, sobbing, clasped his hands together and pleaded, "Babhi, I made a mistake. It won't happen again." I furiously replied, "What you did wasn't just a mistake. You did it intentionally. Tell me honestly, how long has this been going on and why? Where did you even get these filthy videos?" Still crying, he confessed, "A school friend gave them to me. He told me that he secretly takes the women's clothes from his house and hides them in his room. Then, while watching these videos, he holds them against his face and lips, and it feels very comforting. That's why I did it too." I slapped him hard across the face and said, "You should be ashamed of yourself." He truly was embarrassed, but I knew that once someone develops such a filthy habit, it's not easy to get rid of it. That's what made me so distressed. I didn't tell Zamir about it. However, a few days later, my friend, who happened to be a doctor, came over. Hesitant and unsure, I finally opened up about the issue. She took my hand and gently explained, "If you forcefully confront him, the situation will only worsen. But if you handle it the right way, everything will be fine. Boys aged 12 to 14 are not only highly restless, but they also think a lot, especially about male-female relationships. If they're guided and informed correctly, they won't veer towards such inappropriate behavior. In fact, they start following the right path. It's absolutely essential to teach growing boys and girls this kind of knowledge." I was stunned after hearing my friend's words. I said angrily, "What do you mean? Should I now start explaining husband and wife relationships to him?" She smiled and replied, "No, I'm not saying that, but everything has a proper way. Before he picks up the wrong ideas from social media or starts doing wrong things after watching inappropriate videos, you should give him the right guidance. In subtle words, teach him what's right. That's your responsibility." She left after explaining this to me, but it created a new challenge for me. I did a lot of research on the matter, even turning to social media for help. I then found the proper way to guide him and showed him how engaging in these wrong activities could have harmful consequences. I began teaching him about our faith, explaining how such things are grave sins and how they can impact both spiritual and physical well-being. Gradually, my words began to have an effect on him, and he stopped his improper behavior. Noreen's sister-in-law had been beaten and thrown out of her in-laws' house because of the small dowry she brought, and this experience finally opened Tabrez's eyes. Now he no longer forced Noreen to come to our house asking for money, and their lives became a little more peaceful. Zamir's behavior also improved slightly, though he still occasionally said hurtful things. But I believe that with love and patience, everything will get better one day. The reason I've shared this story today is solely to emphasize that we must raise and educate our growing children ourselves. If we leave them unchecked in this age of social media, they will become like unbridled horses, engaging in all sorts of behavior that lacks morality.